A prime target for the Linkfield supporters was the tricolour, which they eventually succeeded in tearing down.
August 29th, 1979, and Dundalk from the south are drawn against Linfield from the north in the European Cup. In the middle of this full-blown riot, a football match is taking place.
I honestly believe that there was a huge amount of naivety surrounded the playing of the game 48 hours after all those people lost their lives.
Those people included the Queen's cousin, Lord Louis Mountbatten, along with 3 of his boating party murdered in Mullaghmore, and 18 British soldiers killed at Warren Point. Both atrocities the result of IRA bombs. While this is as ugly as it ever got, football in Ireland has a history almost as fractious as the country's own past. We used to have one football team that represented the whole island, just like in rugby. But even before the country divided, football did. And since that split, the rivalry between North and South has reflected that political divide.
I mean, we were all glad that the game was played in Belfast. I think everybody felt that sport should win and football should win over the Troubles.
It's almost 100 years since football fractured. Can that split be healed? Can football in Ireland overcome a century of division? Six years before those awful scenes in Dundalk, there was a very different occasion in Dublin. In July 1973, on a glorious day in Lansdowne Road, the world champions took on Ireland.
Terry Dugan, the scorer.
Brazil, the team that won the Jules Rimet Trophy 3 times, so often they got to keep it. A team of footballing legends playing Ireland. Except this wasn't Ireland. This was the Shamrock Rovers Ireland 11. They weren't allowed to call themselves Ireland. There was no flag and there was no anthem. But this was a team made up of players from all 32 counties.
Back again. Oh, what a superb save by Pat Jennings.
The year before, the Scottish and Welsh rugby teams had refused to travel to Dublin because of the Troubles. In 1972, almost 500 people lost their lives in the fighting. 1972 gave us Bloody Friday, Bloody Sunday, the burning of the British Embassy. These were dark times. But Brazil came. They call football the beautiful game, mostly because of this Brazil team. Football is played by more than 250 million people in over 200 countries. It is, quite simply, the most popular sport in the world. Football was a gift to the world from the English. They founded the Football Association in 1863. The Irish Football Association was founded in 1880. Headquartered in Belfast, the IFA is the 4th oldest international football association in the world.
Soccer in Ireland originally started around the Belfast area. So one man in particular, John McAleary, was the main person who instigated football in Ireland. And he set up Cliftonville Football Club. It's one of the first clubs in Ireland. By the late 1870s up until 1880, you had about 4 or 5 clubs around the Belfast area, a couple of clubs in Derry that started to play against each other on a regular basis.
The large point about where soccer sits, if you like, geographically, is urban centres. Now, there are soccer teams across the country, there's soccer teams in rural areas, but primarily what soccer does, they speak to literally their absolute specific geographical area, and they call upon kind of working-class men to play in the teams, to support the team, and it becomes this kind of sense of identity. So soccer has its strengths, very much, but they're strengths that are rooted in very kind of local, urban, working-class areas. That soccer never really transcends or develops a kind of middle-class aesthetic. Rugby has that one. Neither does soccer develop a rural aesthetic because the GAA has that one. So soccer, once it's kind of formed between maybe 1880s, 1890s through to the First World War, where it holds, but it doesn't develop beyond that.
By the 1880s, the football associations of England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland were playing on an annual basis. In December 1882, they set up the International Football Association Board, the IFAB, the board that still formalises the rules of football. They also formalised those annual friendlies into the British Home Championships, and the world's first international football competition was born.
In terms of its heritage, the Irish Football Association is very proud of its history, being the fourth oldest organisation. And it in particular played a key role in the formulation of the International Football Board, what we would call the home nations in football. Arguably that was their biggest international stage, probably for the first 40 or 50 years. Before we had the inception and the gradual emergence of FIFA, the International Football Board was arguably the power broker. It held more control, given that football was ostensibly a British sport.
But football was now a global sport, and in 1904, a body to govern world football was founded in Paris, FIFA. The home nations refused to join.
When FIFA emerged, it almost represented, I suppose, a challenge in some respects to the hierarchy of the International Football Board, but the IFA and the other four home nations have always kept their seats on that International Football Board and celebrate that heritage.
England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales did join FIFA in 1905. Football was now a truly international sport, with international competition set to become a cornerstone of the game, and playing for your country a career high point for all players.
That's a good one. Alan Hunter, and Hunter's there, and Ryan Hamilton.
Every time I pulled on the shirt, I felt fantastically proud because I was representing my country and was always felt it a privilege. Never took it for granted. It was a privilege for me to play for my country.
In those days, if you were called up, you got a letter. And the club called me in that a letter had come and that I'd been selected for the Irish senior team. And I got the boat home, delighted with myself, and turned up at the airport hotel for my first cap with my Chris Waddle haircut, my Ford Capri outside with the Go Fast stripes, and queued up to get a room and saw Jack and said hello to him. And he looked over my shoulder and said to Maurice Setters, "We haven't fucking picked him, have we?" So that's my first cap.
January 1990, moved to Barnsley, and by the end of that season, I made my first international cap for Northern Ireland. You know, and everyone talks about playing for your country is the greatest accolade, you know, you could have. So the game, I suppose, just sort of passed me by with all the, you know, my head was just filled with marshmallowy stuff, I suppose.
Football in Ireland and international football for Ireland was controlled by the IFA, and membership of FIFA wasn't that important to them. They were part of the British Home Championships. They didn't need another international outlet. Back home, the game was growing apace in the south, with great clubs like Bohemians, founded in 1890, Shelbourne in 1895, Shamrock Rovers in 1899, and Dundalk in 1903. Just some of the names that survive to this day. And with the new clubs came a new committee.
Probably the kind of the greatest moment for growth in the south was the foundation of the Leinster Football Association in 1892. And that's when it became way more formalised, more structured. There was a local league set up, local cup competition set up. So the standards improved drastically in the 1890s up into the 1900s within Leinster.
Almost immediately, there was friction between the IFA and its Leinster affiliate.
There was definitely a Belfast bias in terms of international players selected, in terms of venues chosen. Of about, I think, 48 international games before the war, only 6 were ever played in Dublin. All the rest were played in Belfast. Most of the players that are Irish-based were selected were from Ulster-based teams. Even when teams like Bohs and Shelbourne started to win Irish Cup competitions, there still was a bias in terms of selecting international players. And that stems from the IFA Council and its subcommittees. It was dominated by people from Antrim or other parts of Ulster. There were very few representatives from Leinster or Munster or elsewhere on the IFA Council.
All over Europe, storm clouds were gathering. On the home front, the sides are lining up for the great home rule debate, the opposing factions mirroring the divisions in football. The South, by and large, in favour. The North, by and large, interpreting home rule as Rome rule and wanting none of it. And then the war changed everything.
When war started in 1914, most sports, particularly rugby, took the clarion call and stopped playing pretty much every game. Football continued on. It went in for huge criticism in England for continuing for football to be played. Under pressure, they decided to stop all the international games. There was a home internationals every year between England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland. And in 1915, the English FA decided they would stop their league competitions and cup competitions. So the IFA followed suit as well in 1915 by localising the leagues.
The idea of getting people to take time off work, to travel, to play, to watch games that involve a sort of 2-hour train journey, it just becomes impractical, whereas playing a sort of challenge match inside the Belfast area or the Dublin area, it fulfills the function of giving people an afternoon off and a bit of fun, but you're not disrupting kind of wartime work and so on.
In 1916, while war still raged in France, Irish nationalism took a different turn.
Dublin, although kind of continues during 1917, 1918 as a kind of place of peace after the Rising, it's certainly the political dynamics have changed. And from a unionist perspective, they don't want to be involved in a Dublin which is becoming more and more radical, more and more disruptive, where they can't guarantee the safety of their players and fans.
The war affected everything, and not even FIFA escaped untouched. When they refused to expel the defeated Central Powers, the 4 home nations, England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, walked out. At home, the IFA were also having difficulty exercising pre-war levels of control.
The Leinster Football Association had a lot more autonomy for the first time than it ever had before. It ran its own affairs, it ran its own competitions, it raised its own funds. It governed its own footballing affairs for the duration of the war for the first time ever.
They've been living in separate spheres by this point for 6, 7, 8 years. So I think from the playing point of view, etc., their world had shrunk, whether you were a Belfast player or a Dublin player. That's where you played.
In the end, 3 separate but connected events brought the whole house tumbling down. First, the IFA, who had long complained about politics in sport, got political.
The IFA had decided in January 1921 that no football matches would be played in Dublin because of the security situation in Dublin. They believed that there was a lot more violence in Dublin than anywhere else in the country.
The death rate in Belfast between 1920 and 1922 is kind of as high, if not higher, than the death rate in Dublin during the War of Independence. So for the IFA to claim they live in a land of civility is facile.
Then there was an incident in France.
I suppose in February 1921, at an amateur international between Ireland and France in Paris, there were tricolours were being waved by fans. As it transpired, they were African students from the Royal College of Surgeons, but the IFA were disgruntled that politics was being brought into football, had the flags and the fans removed, and this upset a lot of people in Leinster who thought that the IFA would always be seen to support unionism over nationalism. And this was an example of naked politics by the IFA.
And finally, there was a blatantly biased decision against both the spirit and letter of the laws of the game, depending on your point of view.
And that happens in April 1921, that Glenavon and Shelburne have played out a cup semi-final. It's been a draw. There has to be a replay.
Normal procedure would have been for the replay to be played in Dublin. The IFA decided, no, you still have to come back to Belfast. And that's when the Leinster Football Association and Shelburne said, we're leaving.
It's the IFA basically trying to impose their views, their beliefs on the Leinster FA. The Leinster FA are having none of it. The game's not played, they walk off, and that's where the split happens. And shortly afterwards, the Football Association of the Irish Free State will appear.
And that was it. On June the 1st, 1921, the FAI was formed. Where once the IFA had represented football on the entire island, now there were 2 rival associations. And therefore, there would be 2 rival teams, and both would be called Ireland.
Scoreless draw, no good at all to Northern Ireland. The very least they must get is a 1-1 draw.
It's the 1982 World Cup in Spain, and against all odds, Northern Ireland have qualified and been drawn against the host nation.
Armstrong now with a chance to exploit the gap, taking on the entire Spanish defence himself.
Right across the island, we gathered around our televisions to cheer on Billy Bingham's men in green in their heroic fight against insurmountable odds. Seems Northern Ireland hadn't read the script.
Jerry Armstrong, the man with the goal-scoring touch, has done it again for Northern Ireland.
It was fantastic. It beat the host nation to finish top of the table. It gave us a lot of confidence and belief to go through to the quarter-finals, which we did. We were back at the hotel. Billy Bingham said to me, come in and have a look in the wall. And he was putting telegrams on the wall. And there was over 300 telegrams. And I mean, they were coming in from everybody. And we sort of thought,
we've done something special here, you know. And they were telling me there was parties in the Falls Road, the Shankill Road, all the different parts of Belfast celebrating. Northern Ireland were telling me everybody was celebrating down in Dublin. They were all behind us, so we thought we've unified the country.
I know that there was a Catholic Protestant thing going on in our lives in general, but that was the time it all stopped. We all looked to the Northern Ireland team of 82 and 86 as a team who actually inspired us and maybe got us to believe down south that we could go on and do what they did.
In the euphoria of the moment, talk in the classrooms, sitting rooms and pubs of the Republic inevitably turned to reunification.
That also caused problems for the potential of the split to heal, because Harry Cavan actually said, with Northern Ireland doing so well, why would we want Irish unity? Why do we need to unify if we're getting to competitions?
McElroy again, trying to curl it in, hit the ball, and again against the ball.
There had been attempts to reunify the two associations almost as soon as the two associations split in the first place, which is remarkable given how fractious that split had been.
When Leinster seceded, it wasn't the case that they wanted to only represent 26 counties or that the IFA only wanted to represent the 6 counties. Neither of those bodies were partitionist. The IFA claimed up until very recently that they were the football association for football in all of Ireland. And the same with the FAI. It wasn't founded as a 26 counties body. It was founded to represent and to govern football for all of Ireland. And it actually had teams up in 1923 from the Falls and District League.
The FAI wanted to usurp the IFA as sole administrators of the game in Ireland. That was their pitch to the football associations of the world, and on Patrick's Day 1922, that was their pitch to FIFA. Predictably, it was rejected by the home nations, but FIFA didn't entirely dismiss the FAI.
The French really helped them. French had a team come over to Dublin, Gala, and played against Bohemians and other clubs in Dublin. And they actually told them, if you want to become a member of FIFA, you're going to have to limit your jurisdiction to the 26 counties and change your name. So it actually changed its name from the Football Association of Ireland to the Football Association of the Irish Free State.
The importance of the visit of Athletic Club of Gallia cannot be overstated. The FAI hadn't been granted membership, but FIFA at least acknowledged that they existed. In 1923, the British associations reluctantly recognised the newly named Football Association of the Irish Free State as an association with dominion status. Later that year, FIFA accepted Ireland's application and the FAIFS officially joined the international football community. Now, they just needed teams to play against.
Once they became a member of FIFA, it was allowed to compete in the Olympic Games because FIFA organised a football competition for the Olympics. And the first Olympics after the founding of the Irish Free State was the Paris Olympics of 1924. And the football competition was actually held before any other competition of the Olympics. So they were the first sporting body to show off the tricolour at an international level for the Irish Free State. So it's a hugely symbolic moment.
We had a flag, we had a football team. What we didn't have was an anthem. After much discussion, the Irish footballers at the Paris Olympics stood to Thomas Moore's Let Erin Remember, and then went on to reach the quarter-finals. After the Games, the American team stopped off in Dublin to play Ireland. This was the first time the Soldier's Song was played before a game. The Irish version of the song, Éireann na Bhíonn, would become the national anthem almost by default a few years later.
No matter where you go, nothing brings it home to you like stand up for the national anthem. It just changes everything. Suddenly, you've got the country dependent on you.
They've got to find a solution for the anthem situation, which, let's be honest, about half of the population, and as a result of that, from half of where their playing base comes from, would find that anthem very much not to their liking.
No football association is going to claim the credit or indeed the scope to transform the identity politics of any country in and of itself. But I would certainly anticipate that gradually the composition will become more even. And at that stage, there will have to be some kind of facilitated discussion about what it means to be a new Northern Ireland and whether or not some agreement can be reached around the symbols of football that will be more inclusive for both communities.
The issue of anthems wasn't part of the discussions when the first attempt at reunification came about in 1924. an attempt that came very close to success.
The IFA offered to alternate fixtures between Dublin and Belfast, to have equal membership on the IFA Council Committee, on the International Selection Committee, on all of the various different subcommittees. And it also agreed to have the council meetings alternate between Belfast and Dublin. Now, that was held in Belfast, and apparently the FAI delegates were so in shock by the brilliant terms they were offered that everyone thought this is definitely going to be accepted. However, they went back to Dublin, and the powers that be in Dublin overruled the delegation and said the reason why they didn't agree to a unified football team is because the chairman would have remained the IFA chairman, and they wanted that to be alternated as well.
The IFA's trump card was international competition. Those annual fixtures with England, Scotland and Wales were big earners. In the south, the FAIFS represented more clubs and players, but financially they were always on the back foot. When they received an invitation to take part in FIFA's inaugural World Cup in 1930, the FAIFS had to decline on financial grounds. Reunification would make sense, if only monetarily.
In 1932, the IFA agreed to alternate chairman, alternate finances, alternate matches between Dublin and Belfast, equal membership on all the IFA Council subcommittees. And everyone thought, we've got an agreement again. And even it was in the Irish Times, it said that there was an agreement about to be signed between the IFA and FAI. And the FAI, in the last minute, said, oh, we actually want a seat on the International Football Association Board. The IFA have 2 seats, still to this day, on the body that makes the rules for football. And the FAI said, oh, we want one of those too. And the IFA said, no, it's not happening. They hardly spoke for a couple of decades afterwards.
None of this was happening in isolation. The War of Independence was quickly followed by the Civil War. In the aftermath, the new government of the Irish Free State sought to prove to the world our viability as a nation. In 1925, work began on the Ardnacrusha hydroelectric scheme, the biggest and costliest capital outlay undertaken by the continent's youngest nation. We needed the electricity, but we also needed to show the world we were a modern, self-sufficient country. The International Eucharistic Congress in Dublin in 1932 was an even bigger statement. The sheer scale of the event bearing testimony to our pride in our newfound identity, a pride we broadcast to the world. Basically, anything that bigged us up as a nation was to be welcomed, and football fit that bill.
The thing about football is the scale of its expansion and its globalisation. So in that regard, it offers emerging nations the opportunity to project themselves on the international stage, quite unlike most other sports that don't have the same scale, both in terms of participation and spectatorship.
So we competed in the 1934 and 1938 World Cup qualifiers, while the home nations, who had walked out of FIFA again in 1929, didn't even enter. They still had their home championship, and for that competition, our Dominion status allowed the IFA to pick their Ireland team from anywhere on the island, which they did. So, as well as 2 teams called Ireland, you had the ludicrous situation where some players were playing for both Irelands.
During that period, there's about 50 internationals who wear the jersey of Northern Ireland and the jersey of the Irish Free State, later the Republic. Most famously, Johnny Carey.
Man of the match is veteran Johnny Carey. His shrewd pass signals Ayra's first goal.
Jackie Carey, great Manchester United footballer. He played on September 28, he played for an Irish Football Association, Ireland, against England, up in Belfast. And 2 days later, September 30th, he played here in Dalymount. He played against England for an FAI Irish team.
It's the era of the maximum wage. These guys are earning £10 a week and not being paid during the summer, which means somebody rings you up and says, do you want to wear this green shirt or that green shirt? And by the way, we'll pay you £10, £12, whatever it may be. You're going to take it. It's a job.
In 1950, the 4 home nations, who had rejoined FIFA in 1946, took part in the World Cup for the very first time. It was even agreed that the 1949 home championship would be their very own private qualifying group. England beat Ireland 9-2 in that 1949 qualifying game, but that was the IFA's Ireland. 2 months earlier, the FAI's Ireland beat England 2-0, the first foreign country to beat England in England. But 2 teams calling themselves Ireland had competed in the same World Cup campaign, and a small group of players had played for both teams. FIFA stepped in. From now on, there would be a Republic of Ireland team and a Northern Ireland team, and players could only play for one.
It's funny, this split has been about partition, and yet for 3 decades, both football associations spend their time ignoring partition.
In 1950, in a match against Wales, Con Martin captained the last IFA team to feature players from both jurisdictions. This had to happen anyway. In April 1949, Ireland officially left the Commonwealth and declared itself a republic. We were no longer anyone's dominion. The 1958 World Cup qualifying campaign was the first time the home championship wasn't used as a qualifying group. Northern Ireland were now in an open draw.
First of all, in that qualification campaign, in December 1957, Italy travelled to Belfast to play a World Cup qualifier.
Irlanda del Nord. Belfast si presenta così all'occhio della nostra macchina da presa. Una città tranquilla, dalle vie come ovattate da una leggera nebbia che avvolge i severi palazzi.
Because the referee had difficulty getting to the match, it was decided to be a friendly, and the fans were very disgruntled with that they had paid to go to a World Cup qualifier. It transpired to be a friendly, so there was a massive riot. Many of the Italian players were injured. They had to be escorted off the pitch to safety.
This match became a proper diplomatic incident.
The international media reaction was wide condemnation of the wild Irish, the barbarian Irish. And the Irish Republic, as it was then, contacted all the embassies around Europe, said this was not Ireland, this was Northern Ireland, which was partitioned, much to our upset. But this was nothing to do with Ireland as a whole. This was the partition side that caused all the violence.
The FAI protested to the BBC about using the name Ireland in their reports, not Northern Ireland. And Lord Callanan, president of the Irish Olympic Council, wrote to The Times to point out this sort of thing didn't happen in sports that retained an all-island approach.
Northern Ireland qualified for that World Cup, and on their arrival to Malmo in Sweden, there was a bus waiting for them. And on the bus there was a tricolour flag. And the IFA immediately told them to take that tricolour down. This is for the north of Ireland. Northern Ireland got to the quarter-finals. It was a brilliant World Cup that year in '58. And for the first time, people were going, Ireland is getting the credit for this, not Northern Ireland. When it was Northern Ireland who actually did all of playing the football and got us to the quarter-final, maybe we should change our name to Northern Ireland and not be called the Irish Football Association.
As well as the colourful character of Captain Danny Blanchflower, that 1958 Northern Ireland team included a tricky outside right, Billy Bingham. Billy Bingham is a man who looms large in this story. Come the North's golden era in the 80s, it was Bingham's hand on the reins. They were the best of times, they were the worst of times.
Opte against Bonner.
As good as Spain had been in 1982, this was infinitely better. We'd watched with a mixture of pride and envy as Northern Ireland had strutted their stuff. Now it was our turn. It seemed like everybody was an Ireland supporter.
I also greet the members of the Irish football team.
Reunification? Who needs reunification when we're this good on our own?
The nation holds its breath. Yes, we're there!
The good times were so good that we could almost forget the bad times. And there had been some really bad times. Northern Ireland finally erupted in the late 60s. The Troubles. 30 years of almost unrelenting violence. That was the political background to the wonderful day in 1973 when the world champions, Brazil, came to Dublin. It was a great occasion, but behind the scenes, there were issues.
The team was called Shamrock Rovers 11, and they wore Shamrock Rovers Celtic type strip was because the IFA were against it. And even my old pal Liam Toohey would have told me that the FAI weren't too enamoured by the whole thing either, because they weren't running the show.
The way we were told about the situation was that we're coming together as a team, an All-Ireland side, to play against Brazil and to raise money for good causes.
But there's no such thing as a free charity match. Louis Kilcoyne, then the owner of Shamrock Rovers, had enticed Joe Haviland with the promise of the FAI's vote in the forthcoming FIFA presidential elections. And in fairness, almost everybody won. The fans got to see a great match, The charities got some money. Haviland was elected president, a position he held for 24 years. And the team put together by Derek Dougan and John Giles rattled the world champions.
And I still talk to this day, and I tell my children about it as well, about the day I played for an Ireland side who played the Great Brazil in an atmosphere that was electric. And I'm delighted to say we're still talking about it.
And I kept my green and white shirt, my Shamrock Rovers shirt. The rest of them all swapped.
Neither the FAI nor the IFA had wanted this match to go ahead. It was the persuasive powers of the Republic's John Giles and Northern Ireland's Derek Dougan that helped to convince the other players.
Goalkeeper not well positioned, and Terry Dougan the scorer.
I mean, Dougan, although he hadn't played for Northern Ireland, I think he had been left out of the 5 previous games for Northern Ireland. He was getting on, I think he was around 33. It was interesting that he was never picked again for Northern Ireland.
The romance was all out on the pitch. On the sidelines, it was all politics.
You look at some of the characters that played in it, Giles and Don Givens, who had a great career as a player for Ireland, goal scorer, Brian Hamilton, who managed Northern Ireland after as well. So there's a lot of really good people. Alan Hunter, I think, played centre-half. A lot of very good people involved in the game that took it on, so I'm going to go and play in the match. Even though there may have been consequences for them down the road, they were prepared to make the statement and say, maybe this is a good road to go.
In the aftermath of that Brazil match, there was much talk of reunification, at official level too, but again, it came to nothing. In 1978, the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland faced each other in competition for the first time in the qualifying group for the 1980 European Championships. A large-scale Garda presence helped ensure that this historic first match since the split passed without incident. That Northern Ireland team was managed by Danny Blanchflower. His successor in the post was another member of the great 1958 team, Billy Bingham.
It was a great time for football for them. They got some very good players playing at a very good level in England, and they obviously were able to bring that team together, extract the maximum from them tactically and technically, and also they seem to have a very special bond as a group. The combination of a team which was from both halves of the community in the north in such a difficult period in Northern Ireland's history.
Difficult period is an understatement. Long before the violence erupted, there were obvious social divisions along religious lines. The Troubles dug deep into that fault line and blew it wide open. There was precious little that could bridge the divide, but there was football.
You know, it was difficult then, you know, because even just your name could give you away as to what your religion was, and there was always a lot of fear, and people were wary of where they were going and where you used to go to. I mean, for me, I didn't even know any Protestants because I grew up in West Belfast and went to a Catholic school, and you never got the opportunity. But then when I started playing football, when I was 16, 17, you started playing different teams and different teams from other schools.
That's a first point of contact. So you think about the boys and girls that will grow up in traditionally nationalist or unionist communities, will go to schools that maintain that ethos, will only for the first time really meet others, maybe through sport. There are many communities and young Catholic and Protestant players we've spoken to who for the first time will meet, quote unquote, the other through football.
The violence in the north had got so bad that the 1981 home championships had to be abandoned. The only other time this had happened was during the 2 world wars. And then in May 1984, after 100 years, the British home championship, the epicentre of so much confusion in Irish football, ceased to be. That last tournament was won by Northern Ireland. But 1984 is probably better remembered for the Brighton bomb, when the IRA targeted the whole of Margaret Thatcher's government.
It was the most devastating terrorist attack ever launched against British politicians.
And through all this, Billy Bingham's miracle team went marching on. Northern Ireland qualified for the World Cup again in 1986, and again the Republic didn't. Something had to change.
All I do is I prepare the players in the way that I think they need preparing. I inform them with as much information about what they're liable to expect from the opposition. And then once the players go on the field, it's up to them to produce what they're capable of producing, and maybe a little bit more if we can have it.
In February 1986, Jack Charlton became manager of the Republic of Ireland. A hero of England's 1966 World Cup winning team meets Irish football. It was the most unlikely of love stories. In Jack Charlton, we had our own Billy Bingham.
The Northern Ireland team made it a more realistic dream for us all, and even though we needed a Scottishman, Gary Mackay, to bring us to the Euros in '88, we were ready for that because what had happened with the Northern Ireland team in '82 and '86.
Galvin pulling it across, missed kick by Sansom, in goes Aldridge, and Houghton! 1-0!
In our first ever appearance in a championship finals, we beat England, we drew with Russia, and we lost narrowly to the Netherlands, the eventual winners. It has become the stuff of legend. But in a strange way, it was as though the team that Jack built had taken the baton from the team that Billy built and just kept on rolling.
They were a team that were unified. When I see what happened with us in '88, and I weigh it all up now and I try and work out how did it happen, the one thing that made it happen was the dressing room was a superb place to be. There was no bickering. There was nobody felt that they were bigger or better than anybody else. And you had an ethos in that dressing room where at the start it was that you'd work hard for each other. And then by the time that team really started to develop, you'd go as far as to say you'd die for each other. It was colossal.
After the dizzy heights of Germany in '88 came the even dizzier heights of Italia '90, the World Cup. We had finally made it to the big stage. The feel-good factor transcended football.
Ireland itself was beginning to believe in other ways. Around that all-at-one period, we had Stephen Roach doing what he was doing. We had U2 blazing a trail around the world. I think one of the big things, having a female president then who pitched Ireland into a different place. There were so many things that came together, and we were part of it. I just felt it was good to be Irish then.
And Niall Quinn pays off his selection.
And maybe also a good time to redefine what being Irish meant. Jack Charlton wasn't the first manager to employ the granny rule, but certainly nobody used it as much. The team that beat England in Stuttgart had only 4 Irish-born players on it. The team that would beat Italy in Giant Stadium had the same. If just one of your grandparents is Irish, you qualify to play for Ireland, even if that had never been your first choice, as one-time Northern Ireland schoolboy international Alan Kernahan found out.
I couldn't play for Northern Ireland at any other age. It was simple as that. Well, the rule was where you were born or where your mother was born, and then eventually they brought in where your father was born. Both my parents were born in Liverpool, and obviously I was born in Leeds. So Curtis Fleming from Dublin came and joined Middlesbrough, and we were just talking one day, and all of a sudden he says, well, what about, somebody's asked me about you if you could play for the Republic. And I says, well, yes, what do I need to do? And I needed my grandparents' sort of birth certificates, things, because they were born in Belfast before the division. And then that's how it sort of started.
This is the one issue that occurs again and again when talking about the divisions in football on our island: player selection. The FIFA ruling in 1950 meant that Irish players could only play for one Ireland, north or south. Take your pick. But picking isn't always easy and sometimes isn't even possible. Alan Kernahan had wanted to play for Northern Ireland but couldn't. Gerry Armstrong could have played for the Republic of Ireland but didn't.
I'd still want to play for Northern Ireland. If I was born in Northern Ireland, I'd want to play for Northern Ireland. I still look upon myself as an Ulsterman. When I played football for Ulster, I had Gaelic football, and I played and represented Ulster. It was always that there was the Ulster and there was Munster and Leinster and Connacht, and I was brought up in that way with the Gaelic and the hurling, to play in different teams. But I always saw myself as a man from Belfast, and I never thought, I was never given the opportunity, but I would never thought about playing for the Republic of Ireland.
Today, Gerry Armstrong would be given that opportunity. The irony is that it used to be the FAI who complained that the IFA was picking their players. These days, the boot is on the other foot.
Justified because he didn't feel right playing for Northern Ireland, and that was never going to work. So all that passion, enthusiasm, energy, self-belief, determination, all that sort of bundle that comes with being James McLean on a football pitch in an Irish jersey, I'm not so sure he'd have been able to produce that for Northern Ireland.
Identity matters. And in Northern Irish football, your identity can sometimes be called into question. Neil Lennon is a case in point.
I grew up with Neil. We spent most of our childhood together playing sport. I say playing soccer on a Saturday, Gaelic on a Sunday. We played for the same team. We went to different schools, but you know, we were always in each other's pockets. Playing for Northern Ireland, again, was just a continuation of what we were already doing at the time. You know, Neil gets a chance to go and play for Glasgow Celtic, you know, and I had the chance myself, believe it or not, when Martin O'Neill, our manager at Leicester, had moved. He came in for the pair of us. And so obviously Neil gone, I'd stayed at Leicester, and that's when, you know, Neil's problems occurred. You know, he was receiving death threats, his family as well. Yeah, I can understand why Neil at that time thought that it was probably in his best interest to, you know, to call it a day, let's say.
When the two Irelands were drawn in the same group for the 1994 World Cup, our use of the granny rule became an issue. The practice of recruiting second and third generation players just doesn't sit well with some people. And Billy Bingham was one of those people.
You know, there was never a question of any of the lads that came. It wasn't a question, are these guys buying into it? They automatically bought in. They understood what it meant to play for Ireland. And in my time, we never once had an issue where somebody felt they'd made a mistake.
There was really only one way the qualifying group would end up, and that's exactly what happened. On the very last day, we needed a result against Northern Ireland. If we won, we went through. If we lost, we didn't.
No matter which side of the political fence you sit on, it's a derby. Fair and square, full stop. That's it. And that's the way the games were played, full-blooded affairs. You know, no quarter asked, no quarter given.
In October 1993, the IRA killed 8 people with a bomb in a fish shop on the Shankill Road. A week later, the UVF opened fire in a bar in Derry, also killing 8 people. The situation in the north was as bad as it had ever been. There was even talk of moving the match to Liverpool.
There was I say a nagging doubt, but there's something sitting in the back of your mind which doesn't sit well in terms of will something silly happen. But we all went along, we all decided to go, and we trained the night before, and it was okay.
Bar when we got on the coach to go to Windsor Park to train, there was different people, strange people, on board. And we were sort of looking around and saying, "Oh, who's that? Who's that?" And then it worked out that there was security, and which we hadn't had before.
Going to the game is when it got really serious, you know. And a bit I'll never forget was there was this sort of grassy mound, and these kids were all standing up with sticks, and they would all go like that right at our window and pull, and then they'd all go down on their knees, and these other kids came up from behind and did the same thing. And this man with a mask on his face and a big UVF flag was ordering them, and I just looked at it, and that was when I went, Jesus Christ, this has gone somewhere that I just, my brain can't imagine.
And just to add to the emotion of it all, this was to be Billy Bingham's last game in charge of his beloved Northern Ireland.
You can imagine, can't you? You know, we did not want the Republic of Ireland to qualify.
Republic of Ireland fans were told, but under no circumstances should they go to the north. I think about 2,000, 3,000 made it still, no tricolours in hand, and there's no Aaron Naveen playing as well at the match. So it really was a fair-eyed atmosphere that night.
And I think the bit that really got to me while I was playing was when they started singing Trick or Treat, because that's what the poor people in the pub were told before the shooters shot them. And for the crowd to start singing that in unison on that night, that was as low a moment, I think, as I've ever had. In fact, way lower than anything I've ever had on a football pitch. That was just horrific. And to get in, to get out of it, Alan McLaughlin got us out of it.
I actually felt safe on the pitch. And then once you got on the pitch, and as everyone else says, you know, you're just focusing on what you're trying to do and not making an arse of yourself.
Alan McLaughlin had been on the field just a few minutes when there was a goal.
It's a goal! Northern Ireland had scored!
For Northern Ireland.
Marvellous goal! And Jimmy Quinn does what he threatened to do.
And then came perhaps the most contentious incident of the evening.
Billy poured a load of petrol on the flames, looking for the edge, I suppose. And, you know, he was happy. He was getting the crowd to sing all those terrible songs. turning around as if leading the choir.
It was all in, do what you want, do what you have to do to try and get a result from the match, but it wasn't nice. It wasn't very subtle, and I would think that it wouldn't be the sort of behaviour that any association would like their manager to partake in nowadays.
If it finished like this, we were out. But that's not the way the script was written. There was time for one more twist.
13 minutes of normal time.
Yes, that's plenty of time for us to get back in it.
Comes in, it's headed out. I remember chesting it down, as I've been taught many times, as I've practiced many times, down onto my wrong foot and hit it sweet. And as soon as I hit it, it was doing that.
And there it was. On a tense and nervous night, a draw was enough.
Another big memory of that night was Alan MacDonald, who's since passed away, very, very young, tragically. Alan MacDonald was their captain on the night, and he came into our dressing room and wished us well in the tournament in America and to represent the island of Ireland. Still to this day, it puts goosebumps and hairs on the back of my neck to think, in the middle of all that, you know, a man who was reared on the Protestant side of all the troubles that took place, for him to show the courage to come in, because that would have gotten out. There's no doubt, you know, that would have sped out, that he would have done that. To show the courage to come in, to congratulate us then and to wish us well, and to say we were representing the country of Ireland there, and we'll be shouting for you, like I'm sure you guys shouted for Northern Ireland in 82 and 86. And they're the moments that you look back on in your career and say, wow, you know, so the hairs are coming up now. But that's my biggest memory of that night.
The 1994 World Cup in America will be remembered for that famous victory in Giant Stadium when Ray Houghton topped his goal against England with his goal against Italy. We beat the Italians that day. Brazil beat them later on in the final. That evening really was as good as it got, but it was nowhere near good enough to mask the horror of the murder of 6 people watching the match in Loughin Island in County Down. But the days of extreme violence were also numbered. We didn't know it then, but exploratory talks had started. Exploratory talks that would lead to the peace process and ultimately to the Good Friday Agreement. In 2013, Martin O'Neill, team captain during Northern Ireland's golden years and one of the Shamrock Rovers 11, was appointed manager of the Republic of Ireland. A Northern Ireland great managing the Republic of Ireland's team. Is that appointment the closest we'll ever get to reunification? Or is there any chance of a unified all-Ireland team?
Is there a willingness to have an all-Ireland team? I don't see that, because it'd be like the turkeys voting for Christmas if the administrators voted for an all-Ireland team, because it would mean half of them be out of business, half of them would have to hand back their blazers, and they would miss out on their trips, their benefits, their expenses, their ability to get on UEFA committees, on FIFA committees, and all the perks that go with that.
Why would you not give yourself the best chance of doing well? I'm from Northern Ireland, but I consider myself to be a son of Ireland, the island of Ireland. I support the rugby team, and again, you can't pick holes in the rugby. There's players from the north that play, and there's players from the south. What's the difference?
The rugby lads show how it can all work together, so I would not give up on the idea that it may happen one day.
I believe we'd be better with an all-Ireland league, full professional all-Ireland league. And I believe that we would be better with an all-Ireland soccer team. But it doesn't mean it's going to happen.
An award-winning team have another documentary for us tomorrow night, this time telling the tale of how deaf members of our society are left with the choice of dole or disability payment or fulfilling their potential by crossing the Irish Sea, where the UK embraces their talents and successful careers are forged from accountancy to fashion design. London Calling is tomorrow at 10:15. Up next, Adrian Dunbar unearths his roots. Let's hope there's no Ben Coppers in his lineage in Who Do You Think You Are?